In October of 2019, I released my first album for a music library called Submerged. When I was writing it, I documented the process of writing on my Instagram account. And for one piece, I screen recorded my process from a blank page to a first couple of bars with orchestration and shared some snippets of it. And back then I promised I would make a video when the piece was done to do a complete overview of how it's constructed, what orchestration tricks I used, and what the piece has become in the end, basically. So here we are, a couple of months later, but I'm gonna dive into it now. Here is Last Stand from my album Submerged. So I'll play you the track first. It's an epic hybrid orchestral, all guns out, blazing track, as you'll notice soon enough. What you'll see is the MIDI tracks. However, this is my mix session, so I bounce everything to audio. So let's freaking go. And that's it. So this piece started from very simple material, and it was the start with the low note alternating with the brass choir. And I've soloed out the brass choir now. Let's first just give it a run through how it sounds. So a very common technique when writing or orchestrating is to stack chords from low instruments to high instruments. So in this case with the brass, that would be trombones on the bottom, horns in the middle, trumpets on top. However, the trumpet is a very bright instrument and very well suited to play melody and to make melody stand out in such a setting of the brass choir. So that's why here you can see, if you look at this part over here, the highlighted notes are the trumpets, and these are the horns. So you see that I didn't stack them, but the horns and the trumpets are overlapping a little bit. And why do I do this? That's because, like I said, the trumpet is very well suited to carry the melody. So that's why I chose to have the trumpet carry the moving notes that are moving down, while the horn, it has a much mellower, softer sound, let's say, and therefore I really like it when it just holds one note, the one common note that is there between the two chords you're alternating between. So they're holding the notes, the trumpets. They have the melody going down, and together. So I chose to do this because of voice leading, and you hear it very well in the second chord particularly, because there both trumpets go below the first horn. And while this is a very harsh interval, you do still hear the melody separated, and you perceive the horn more as a chord note than as a melody note. To add some largeness to the brass section, I also added a choir here. And choir is not only good for this epic big sound, but also to enhance the brass sound with some air, as I call it. I'll do that a couple of times throughout the piece. So the choir doesn't follow the same rhythm as the brass. That's because with the libraries I have, it's very hard to do that, to do a staccato choir. And if your libraries can't do it, then you should avoid it, in my opinion. It will deteriorate the overall sound of the arrangement. In the end here, I chose to let the choir continue throughout the last 3 bars to add to the development that we have going on. So now let's talk a little bit about the low note that's opening the thing. This is just a all guns blazing, brass, percussion, strings, sound design, synth bass, everything going just on a low B flat. And I chose here to keep the note on the B flat for the first couple of bars. There is a low note every 2 bars, and if I would follow the chords, the notes would be B flat, G flat, B flat, G flat. However, to me, this is just an alternating motion between 2 separate notes, and I want some development in these couple of bars. So I chose to do B flat, B flat, B flat, G flat, and F. So we perceive the G flat when we hear it for the first time, we perceive it as a change, and therefore it adds to the build-up we have going on to the first climax of the piece. So now let's talk about this melody a little bit that's coming in towards the end. This is also used to add to the build-up that we have going on. And when I first wrote this melody, it was going. But from there I was stuck. It was really, alright, where am I gonna go? So in order to use it to enhance the build-up even more, I chose to change direction halfway and started going up. So from here, this is the transition. I wanted to create this sense of like everything has just exploded and we're now kind of floating in the debris in this kind of a slow motion shot before the madness starts again. So here was just looking for different layers that have this kind of a floating around sense, which are building, but there's not really a pulse to them. And there we are. And then I did need some kind of an extra driving pulse to go to the next part. So I chose to add some low basses. So this new part is in it's 4 bars, of which they alternate between a 3/4 and a 7/8 bar, as you can see in the top here. And I chose to move to this weird time signature structure in 2 reasons. That's 1, because we are on that later in the next section. And 2, it adds to this feeling that, you know, you're floating around, you have no idea what's happening. You also can't really keep a pulse with you because there is no pulse and it is so different than what we've heard previously. And finally, I add a couple of bass notes which are regular compared to each other, but they are not fixed on a certain 1 or a 2 or anything. So as you can see here, it starts on a 1, but then here it starts shifting in the bar. However, if you compare them to each other, there is the same amount of time in between them. So in this very open, floating around space, we suddenly have a very fixed, regular pulse coming in that we can't really place, but it helps build to the next section. So here we are in the next section, which I call B. So we just come from A, we have had an intersection, and here we have B. And this has a very weird time signature. So it's a 3/4 followed by a 7/8, and that alternates all the time. However, I just perceive the 3/4 and the 7/8 together as one long bar. It's just when you're playing it in Cubase, it's easier to do it this way. And why did I do that? Because the first idea for this section was the low accents, the bum bum, the A flat, B flat that we have going on all the time. And I wanted to put as much emphasis on these accents as I could without it being, you know, too much. And one way I thought of doing this was to have a little bit of extra space after I use the accents by just 1 extra 8th note. So you have a little bit of breathing space, let's say, after the accents. The instruments that are most important for the accents are the timpani and the low men, shouts. Staccato, I call them shouts. So the timpani here, they really add to the accents, and then I use the choir again to add some air and some breath to the sound. And I chose there to have 2 notes not played by the timpani. That's because a timpani in an orchestra, you only have about 4 or 5, so you cannot play every note. And I'll get into this, but the notes I'm using, it's super chromatic and it's changing all the time. If I want to have it sound like it was actually played by an orchestra, I can't really have all the notes in the timpani because you don't hear it that often. I selected 4 or 5 notes and those would be played by the timpani. And then the men, the choir, they are on all the notes because they still enhance the accents in the strings. So now to the chromatism. This is the string part. Some type of chromatism is very useful in this type of action music because it really gives this sense of you can't grasp it, you don't know where it's going, and it has this chasing element. So and here it was just, I knew I want to stay somehow in B flat, so I chose to keep the B flat and F continuously through the thing. And then it was just a sense of carefully selecting notes, placing them, changing them, listening back, changing some more things. And I just want to get into a little bit about orchestrating with strings. When I write such a staccato string pattern, I like to use both a string ensemble patch as well as the strings separated in sections. So you have short violas, short celli, short violins, short basses and everything. When a sample library records a separate section, they can add a lot of detail to it. So you really have only that string sound with tons of different articulations, so you can get all the detail out of the instrument as you want. While a string ensemble section you can use to add, it's not that detailed because like it's the whole ensemble, but you can use that to add a little bit more of a large sound to your strings. So I like to layer these to have both of these elements, both the detail of the sampled separate instrument as well as the largeness of the ensemble patch. What you hear next is only the sampled violas and celli and basses. So here you really hear the detail of these separate instruments. And now I'll play you just the ensemble patch. So this one is not nearly as detailed as the other one, so it is also, in my opinion, not as realistic as the separate sections. But I like the big sound of it, so that's why I chose to layer them, and then it sounds like this. You could use the same trick when you write long string notes. For example, you could have the separate sections play a legato patch, so they have their own voice leading, and have an ensemble patch underneath to add a little bit of largeness to the detail. Next up is the brass staccato notes, and I had a lot of fun writing these. I wrote this apart from the strings, so they would not follow the same notes. They would really have their own, like, let's say, melody or their own structure in these 4 bars. So the poor trumpet player here, and the percussion here is just mainly the electronic drum kit. So I added this drum kit here to add a little bit of an electronic sound, because the rhythm is already carried so much by the strings. I didn't want it to be too obvious, so it's not that loud. It just adds a little bit of punch to the accents that are there. Now that we're here, we've had all kinds of explosions and weird stuff and strange rhythms and everything. So I knew, all right, here I need a break. I need somehow to dial it down a notch. And I thought, well, I need air. What do you do when you need air? You add choir. So I added choir here. So I started with these choir chords in a female choir. But I had a lot of trouble with building this because I also wanted to keep something of the momentum that had been going on already alive. So I just experimented with a whole lot of different layers, and in the end I came up with the following. So first of all, I layered it with viola tremolo. Viola's going up and down the string because this also has the long notes, but it has really this tension built into it, and also the sense that you're still anticipating something more to come. Then I added some horn staccato notes going down to have some kind of rhythmic momentum still going on. And finally some small percussion, smaller than earlier, to still keep some kind of a percussive element in there as well. So if you add those together, you'll get this. So, and I also layered a lot of sound design effects with this, so that we would still have the idea of the hybrid synths that we have going on, to keep those included here. However, it still wasn't enough, and I got stuck. I was like, how will I fix this? I tried all kinds of different things, but in the end I came to the idea of this. So this is a clear melody going up every 2 bars, and it really helped me with building this sense of anticipation. Like we are in a break right now, but it's not over and we're still building towards something. So let me just play it again without the staccato strings. So it feels as if there's missing something. Now once more again with. So in the second half, when we're really building towards the climax, I add a horn melody again, and the string pattern is doubled in the violins. And the kit comes back, and I want to talk about the kit a little bit, and especially about the rhythm it's playing. So we are here in a 3/4 bar, and the 3/4 bar you can perceive in 2 different ways. One is like just a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, where every bar stands on its own. Another way you can perceive it is that you add 2 bars together and they kind of function as one. So you have a heavy accent on the first and then a lighter accent on the second, like you would have in a pop song where you have the kick and the snare. Here I chose to do the second one, and I use this to create a special effect, which is a rhythmic or a metrical modulation. And this effect basically means that it seems like you're speeding up or slowing down, while there's always one common denominator, one common tempo that stays the same in both of the tempi, let's say. So here we have the accents being grouped in 3, because it's a 3/4 bar. So in the drums that would be, and later on we are back in a 4/4 bar, where the quarter note is 135, stays the same, but now the accents are grouped in 2. So you have doom, dak, doom, dak. And if you play those 2 right after each other, you really see notice the difference. So this feeling of speeding up really helped me to build in this climax. So it just enhances this tension that just keeps building. So now we have returned to A, and I call this A was the opening. I call this A accent now because we have changed it a little bit. And the change is basically that there is a melody on top, and the bass note now does follow the chord notes as well. And I'm going to show you one thing that you haven't heard before. One theme that has gone throughout this piece is to add choir or to add voice, to add air as a quality to a sound. And I'm gonna play this and I'm gonna solo a little bit, and then you'll see what I mean. So this is super high, and no offense to the woman who recorded it or the sample library, it doesn't sound that good if you play it solo. Huge respect to her though, definitely, for recording that. However, you do have the kind of vocal element that I use here, again, to enhance the sound of the melody. So I don't solo it out, I don't make it very prominent in the mix, but I make sure that the melody has this quality of sound to it. This final part where the drums come back and everything comes together is basically a mixture of the opening with the brass chords in the background and the breakdown part with the melody that we've taken from there. So these brass chords. And again, voice leading is the most important thing when choosing which notes to assign to what brass instrument. And at this part also the kit comes back and then several other layers of percussion. And I didn't want to add too much percussion. I wanted the piece to be very orchestrally driven, if that's a thing. And I wanted to use the percussion mainly to add some synth and sound design elements. That's why I chose the electronic kit to be the most prominent percussion instrument, along with the timpani. And then I have some other small elements that come back here and there. And here they come back as well to add to the climax. And then finally, in the end, we have a return of the rhythmic craziness. And here it's a much smaller setting. So I chose to remove the ensemble patch so we could just listen to the detail of the separate string sounds because it's way more small and intimate. And I mixed the brass in such a way that is really far back in the room. And I think here you can really hear really well that I try to mix the brass as it would in a real orchestra setting. So you have the strings in the front and then the brass sitting just behind it. So there you have it. That's my piece Last Stand and how I constructed it, some things I used. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you would like to see more of these type of breakdowns, maybe from another track of Submerged, just let me know in the comments. You can listen to the full album. I've put it in the description. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. From my space to yours, have a great day.